Are you suffocating under the weight of blame you never deserved? Certain individuals sidestep accountability for their own turbulent feelings, expertly twisting reality until you're crushed by guilt that isn't yours. They demand you crumble, rationalize their discontent, and soak up their negativity like a sponge. But imagine this: the exact second you refuse to absorb their toxic blame is the second you reclaim your stolen strength. Think of it like being caught in an emotional snare, meticulously set, waiting for you to thrash, weaken, and finally break. But what if you simply refuse to struggle? What if you remain perfectly still, defiant, rejecting their rigged game? The trapper is left with nothing but an empty snare. Consider a relentless tempest. It howls, demands submission, batters everything relentlessly. Yet the unyielding cliff face doesn't debate the gale. It endures, solid, impervious, untouched. Why? Because those who weaponize guilt need your turmoil. They bank on your self-doubt, your frantic explanations, your desperate justifications. But what if you offered none? What if, instead of scrambling to defend your worth, you simply held your space, unshakable? That is the moment the power dynamic shatters. That is when they face the stark reality. Their emotional leverage is useless against you. So, how do you dismantle their guilt-fueled attacks without descending into arguments, endless justifications, or getting ensnared in their emotional quicksand? Stick around. The final revelation could fundamentally alter your interactions. Let's begin dismantling their game. Number 1. Expose the emotional blackmail. We need to dissect one of the most corrosive yet insidious tools of control: guilt tripping. It's venomous precisely because it bypasses reason, targeting your innate desire to be decent, to be good. When someone inflicts guilt, they're not engaging your intellect. They're launching an assault on your core emotions. They warp your inherent sense of duty, making you feel indebted, obligated, even when logic screams otherwise. It sounds like poison dripped in your ear. After all my sacrifices, this is the gratitude I get. Or the heart-wrenching, fine, clearly I mean nothing to you. Picture a parent wielding obligation like a whip, a friend punishing your boundaries, a colleague offloading their duties onto your conscience. The objective is brutally consistent: manipulate you into acting from a place of imposed shame, not authentic desire. The cold truth? Emotional blackmailers exploit your feelings to dominate your actions. They don't need brute force when they can simply wound you until you comply willingly. This is where ancient Stoic insight becomes a shield. Epictetus warned, if you are angered by someone's provocation, realize that your own mind is participating. Guilt operates identically. Their ability to make you feel guilty hinges not only on their manipulation, but on your permission. You're allowing their toxic words to infect your inner peace. The instant you identify their guilt trip for the violation it is, their power evaporates. Consider Jake. His friend relentlessly bled him dry emotionally, guilting him for any moment not dedicated to him. Phrases like, "I suppose I'm just disposable now," were the norm. Initially, Jake, drowning in guilt, would sacrifice his own needs, desperately trying to prove his loyalty. But the pattern became undeniable. Nothing was ever sufficient. His friend craved not companionship, but dominion over Jake's life. That revelation armed Jake. He stopped absorbing the poison and responded with stark clarity. Our friendship matters, but my availability isn't limitless. If this is unacceptable, perhaps this connection needs re-evaluation. Instantly, the manipulative grip loosened. How to counter this? First, name the poison. When that familiar sick feeling of guilt arises, interrogate it. Is this genuine, or am I being emotionally extorted? Second, cease self-flagellation. You owe no defense to someone aiming to control you through shame. Finally, erect non-negotiable barriers. Starve the guilt of your reaction and you starve it of its power. Ultimately, no one plants guilt in you unless you provide fertile ground. Unmask the manipulation, seize back your autonomy, and root your decisions in self-worth, never in manufactured shame. Number 2, Cultivate emotional invulnerability. Let's explore the ultimate defense against guilt warfare, maintaining absolute emotional detachment. The guilt tripper has one singular aim: to incite a reaction, to trigger enough emotional pain that you capitulate. The more volatile your emotions, the tighter their stranglehold, but the moment you withdraw your emotional participation, their entire strategy collapses. Face this reality. Emotional manipulators don't need factual accuracy. They only need you to feel fundamentally flawed. They'll distort reality, magnify slights, and plant seeds of self-doubt. Anything to provoke the desired emotional breakdown. If you erupt, become defensive, get flustered, or drown them in explanations, you've walked right into their trap. However, if you remain composed, coolly observe their machinations, and refuse to join their emotional circus, you leave them powerless. Here, the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius shines. Your power resides in your mind, not external circumstances. Grasp this, and you access true strength. You cannot dictate another's toxic behavior, but your response is entirely within your command. Confronted with guilt manipulation, your most potent weapon is serene detachment. Refuse to be swept into their vortex of negativity. Step back mentally, breathe, and dissect the situation with cold logic. Ask, is their objective to make me feel inadequate so I surrender? Answering yes illuminates their tactic. Once exposed, the compulsion to justify or emotionally react dissolves. Recall Emily. Her relative wielded guilt like a cudgel. A missed call prompted barbs like, family clearly isn't your priority. Previously, this sent Emily spiraling into apologies for non-existent transgressions. Then she chose emotional disengagement. The next guilt-laced text met a calm pause, a deep breath, and a simple neutral reply. I will call back when I am available. No defensiveness, no lengthy excuses. The effect? The guilt tripping ceased almost overnight. By refusing to fuel the emotional fire, Emily neutralized the manipulation. How to achieve this detachment? First, identify the assault. When guilt begins to constrict your chest, ask, is this valid concern or emotional weaponry? Second, master your reaction. Resist the urge to react viscerally. Pause. A measured response carries infinitely more weight than an emotional outburst. Finally, disengage from their manufactured crisis. The less emotional energy you invest, the quicker their manipulative structure crumbles. Remember, guilt tripping thrives only with your emotional consent. Remain centered, logical, and fiercely protective of your inner state. It is yours alone to govern, not theirs to plunder. Number 3, refuse false apologies. Let's confront a critical error in dealing with guilt-mongers, apologizing when you've committed no wrong. It's a deceptively easy pitfall. They inflict emotional pressure, you feel cornered, and suddenly, I'm sorry escapes your lips, not from genuine remorse, but from a desperate desire to extinguish the conflict. Here's the insidious outcome. The coerced apology doesn't resolve anything. It validates their manipulative tactics. Apologizing for an offense you didn't commit reinforces their dominance. It signals that sufficient emotional pressure can compel you to shoulder blame that isn't rightfully yours. Once this pattern is established, expect it to be exploited repeatedly. They learn that applying pressure, feigning victimhood, or twisting facts guarantees your submission. But grasp this essential truth. If you stand on solid ground, hold fast to your reality. You owe no apology for enforcing boundaries, prioritizing your well-being, or rejecting manipulation. Marcus Aurelius offered stark guidance. Count nothing. Valuable that compels you to betray your promise or forfeit your self-respect. Simply put, no amount of superficial peace justifies sacrificing your integrity. Apologizing solely to appease another when you're blameless might feel expedient, but it erodes your self-worth piece by piece. Authentic apologies arise from conviction, never coercion. Consider Alex. His friend habitually guilted him into favors. Refusal met with, "Wow, after all I've done for you." Previously, Alex would crumble, offering apologies laced with excuses. "So sorry, just swamped right now." Then came the epiphany. He wasn't sorry, he wasn't wrong. Saying no was his right. The next time the guilt trip came, Alex, instead of apologizing, stated calmly, "I understand your position, but I'm unable to assist this time." No apology, no defensiveness, just a firm, respectful refusal. The dynamic shifted irrevocably. How to break this cycle? First, detect coerced apologies. Ask yourself, am I sorry because I genuinely erred, or because their guilt is crushing me? Second, substitute apology with assertion. Instead of "I'm sorry," try "I hear your perspective, but my decision stands." Finally, recognize that upholding your truth isn't harshness. It's fundamental self-respect. Manipulators depend on guilt to dismantle your defenses. Do not surrender. If you've done no wrong, offer no apology. Own your truth and witness there. Leverage disintegrate. Found this empowering? Hit like and subscribe for more strategies to reclaim your power. Number 4. Erect impenetrable boundaries. Let's discuss a highly effective countermeasure to guilt assaults, establishing crystal clear, non-negotiable boundaries. Those who wield guilt despise limitations. They flourish by making you the caretaker of their feelings, morphing your generosity into an inescapable debt. The instant you assert a limit, expect fierce resistance. You'll hear cries of, "How could you betray me like this?" or "I mistakenly thought our bond meant more." Internalize this critical fact. Manipulators don't honor boundaries. They relentlessly probe for weaknesses. The stark reality is this: guilt is their siege weapon, but your boundaries are your fortress walls. The more robust your defenses, the less susceptible you are to their attacks. Yet here lies the common blunder, feeling compelled to justify the boundary. People often dilute their no with lengthy explanations, desperately hoping for understanding and acceptance. But guilt trippers aren't seeking understanding, they're hunting for loopholes. Every explanation provides grist for their manipulative mill, another angle to argue, distort, and intensify your guilt. Therefore, the strategy is brutally simple. Deliver your no without embellishment or apology. Here, Epictetus's wisdom is paramount. We surrender control in proportion to the value we place on things outside our control. Contemplate this. If your choices hinge on anticipating someone else's emotional reaction, you are ceding command of your own life. You cannot govern their feelings or preempt their disappointment, but you can control the steadfastness of your own position. Remember Jake. His friend constantly guilted him for favors. A no from Jake triggered accusations. "So I guess you're unreliable." Previously, Jake would frantically defend himself. "That's not true. I'm just incredibly busy." Inevitably capitulating. Then he changed tactics. He stopped justifying. The next guilt trip met a simple, "I'm unable to help with that," followed by resolute silence. No rationalizations, no appeals for understanding, just a calm, unyielding boundary. The guilt trip fizzled, powerless. How to construct these boundaries? First, know you owe no one a dissertation for your choices. A concise "no, that's not possible for me" suffices. Second, anticipate pushback. Manipulators will test your resolve. That doesn't necessitate surrender. Finally, maintain the line, rigorously. Boundaries are effective only through unwavering enforcement. In conclusion, manipulators relentlessly employ guilt to breach your personal defenses. Stand firm, and their power vanishes. Utter no with conviction, and never forget, your tranquility is non-negotiable. Number 5. Re-anchor in logic. Let's illuminate one of the swiftest methods to escape the clutches of guilt, forcefully shifting the interaction back to the realm of pure logic. Guilt trippers bypass factual discourse entirely. Their currency is emotional manipulation. Their goal isn't to disprove your stance, it's simply to make you feel profoundly wrong. The moment they succeed in provoking an emotional response, they've secured victory. Why? Because you're no longer anchored in your decision. You're adrift in a sea of self-justification, desperately trying to prove you aren't the villain they paint you to be. Understand this. Emotion acts like a dense fog, obscuring clear judgment. When guilt overwhelms you, rational thought evaporates. Self-doubt gnaws, Am I truly being unfair? Could they possibly be right? But step outside the emotional haze and the manipulation becomes glaringly obvious. This isn't dialogue, it's emotional coercion. The most effective antidote: strip away the emotion and reintroduce cold, hard logic. Epictetus provided the blueprint. First, determine the person you resolve to be. Then act accordingly. In essence, define your principles and values, then let your actions align. If you are certain, deep down, that your choice is sound, equitable, and necessary, then the debate is over. You require neither external validation nor permission, and you certainly have no obligation to feel guilty. Remember Emily? Her friend weaponized guilt over favors. A no elicited retorts like, "Guess I can't rely on you," or "I'd do it for you, but clearly the feeling isn't mutual." Previously, guilt compelled Emily to yield for peace's sake. But one day, bypassing emotion, she posed a calm, logical query. "Are you asserting that I'm a deficient friend solely because I established a personal limit?" Her friend faltered, exposed. The manipulative tactic was defused, and the guilt-tripping ceased. How to execute this shift to logic? First, resist. Reaction. Prioritize observation. When a guilt trip is initiated, pause deliberately before responding. Second, employ direct logical inquiries. Compel them to articulate their position in a way that reveals the manipulative underpinnings. Finally, remain immovably anchored in your decision. Once emotion is removed from the equation, their control disintegrates. Ultimately, guilt functions only when permitted to obscure reason. Stay rational, stay resolute, and remember, manipulation flourishes in emotional shadows, but perishes under the bright light of logic. If you've journeyed this far, signal your resonance with a thank God in the comments and a like if this resonates. Your engagement fuels this mission to share empowering truths. May these insights spark transformation, and may our collective learning continue. Thank you sincerely for being here. Number 6. Disengage from the toxic game. Let's address the most direct route to freedom from guilt tripping: utterly refusing to participate in their destructive game. Guilt trippers depend entirely on one element: your engagement. They crave your defensiveness, your explanations, your justifications for defying their demands. The second you step onto their playing field, you're ensnared. You're operating under their rules, locked in an emotional battle where every word you utter can and will be twisted to amplify your perceived wrongdoing. The brutal truth: your participation guarantees their victory. Consequently, the most formidable countermove isn't rebuttal, clarification, or attempting to force empathy. It's complete detachment. When you cease feeding the toxic cycle, their manipulative efforts starve. Regardless of the intensity of their guilt-inducing tactics, if you stay centered and refuse to engage, you offer them no purchase, no leverage. Seneca's wisdom resonates profoundly. Silence is a lesson learned through life's many sufferings. At times, the optimal response is not verbal combat, but profound silence. Not every assault warrants a counterattack. Not every accusation demands refutation. Maintaining composure and opting for silence radically alters the power balance. Consider Sarah. Her relative deployed guilt whenever Sarah asserted a boundary. A no was met with, "Clearly, family means nothing to you." Previously, Sarah would rush to placate, "It's not like that, I'm just overwhelmed," and inevitably succumbing. Then she adopted a radical approach. The next guilt-laden comment arrived. Sarah didn't argue, didn't explain. She simply paused, breathed, and remained silent. Then, sidestepping the accusation entirely, she shifted the topic. The outcome? The guilt-tripping sputtered and died almost instantly. Deprived of a reaction, the manipulation engine stalled. How do you implement this refusal? First, recognize the setup. The moment guilt is weaponized against you, pause. Suppress the emotional knee-jerk reaction. Second, prioritize silence over self-defense. Instead of scrambling for explanations, remain calm and allow the manipulative wave to crest and break harmlessly against your silence. Finally, observe the rapid decline of their power. Without your engagement, their guilt-tripping becomes utterly impotent. Remember, manipulation functions only if you allow yourself to be drawn into its vortex. Stay aloof, stay composed, and understand that often the most powerful statement is none at all. Number 7. Abandon self-justification. Let's tackle one of the most common yet detrimental responses to guilt trippers, the compulsion to justify yourself. When faced with guilt-based manipulation, your immediate reflex might be to defend your rationale, clarify your intentions, or prove you're not the monster they imply. But here lies the trap. The more you explain, the more ammunition you provide for them to twist. They aren't listening to comprehend, they're scanning for vulnerabilities to exploit. Face this reality. Justification is a snare. The instant you begin explaining, you relinquish control. You state, "I cannot assist right now due to existing commitments." And they retort, "So other things are more important than me." You assert, "I must protect my well-being by setting limits." And they warp it into, "So you find me burdensome?" Regardless of your careful phrasing, they possess an uncanny ability to invert your words against you. Epictetus offered a powerful alternative. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Translation: cease trying to persuade others of the validity of your choices. Simply live them. Instead of justifying your boundaries, enforce them unflinchingly. Instead of detailing why you reject manipulation, demonstrate it through decisive action. You owe no validation to those who consistently disregard your choices. Recall Mark. His colleague constantly tried guilting him into extra tasks. When Mark refused, the colleague pushed, "Seriously? I thought we were a team." Initially, Mark would justify, "My plate is full," or "I need to prioritize my own projects." Yet invariably, his co-worker twisted his words, leaving Mark feeling guilty. Then Mark stopped playing. The next guilt trip attempt was met with a simple, unadorned, "No, I can't." No excuses, no debate, just a calm, immovable finality. Instantly, the manipulation ceased. His co-worker recognized that without an explanation to dissect and attack, the game was over. How to break free from justification? First, identify the pattern. If someone relentlessly pushes after your initial refusal, refuse to be drawn into further explanation. Second, keep responses concise and absolute. A straightforward, "That won't work for me," holds more power than an elaborate defense. Finally, let actions be your declaration. Demonstrate your expectations through behavior rather than pleading for respect verbally. Ultimately, you are not obligated to provide explanations to individuals seeking only to dismantle your boundaries. Cease justifying, stand resolute, and remember, your decisions belong to you, not to their judgment. Number 7. Abandon self-justification. Let's tackle one of the most common yet detrimental responses to guilt trippers, the compulsion to justify yourself. When faced with guilt-based manipulation, your immediate reflex might be to defend your rationale, clarify your intentions, or prove you're not the monster they imply. But here lies the trap. The more you explain, the more ammunition you provide for them to twist. They aren't listening to comprehend, they're scanning for vulnerabilities to exploit. Face this reality. Justification is a snare. The instant you begin explaining, you relinquish control. You state, "I cannot assist right now due to existing commitments." And they retort, "So other things are more important than me." You assert, "I must protect my well-being by setting limits," and they warp it into, "So you find me burdensome?" Regardless of your careful phrasing, they possess an uncanny ability to invert your words against you. Epictetus offered a powerful alternative. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Translation: cease trying to persuade others of the validity of your choices. Simply live them. Instead of justifying your boundaries, enforce them unflinchingly. Instead of detailing why you reject manipulation, demonstrate it through decisive action. You owe no validation to those who consistently disregard your choices. Recall Mark. His colleague constantly tried guilting him into extra tasks. When Mark refused, the colleague pushed, "Seriously? I thought we were a team." Initially, Mark would justify, "My plate is full," or "I need to prioritize my own projects." Yet invariably, his co-worker twisted his words, leaving Mark feeling guilty. Then Mark stopped playing. The next guilt trip attempt was met with a simple, unadorned, "No, I can't." No excuses, no debate, just a calm, immovable finality. Instantly, the manipulation ceased. His co-worker recognized that without an explanation to dissect and attack, the game was over. How to break free from justification? First, identify the pattern. If someone relentlessly pushes after your initial refusal, refuse to be drawn into further explanation. Second, keep responses concise and absolute. A straightforward, "That won't work for me," holds more power than an elaborate defense. Finally, let actions be your declaration. Demonstrate your expectations through behavior rather than pleading for respect verbally. Ultimately, you are not obligated to provide explanations to individuals seeking only to dismantle your boundaries. Cease justifying, stand resolute, and remember, your decisions belong to you, not to their judgment.